Welcome to Psych Sessions Re-Release. This is a curated series of episodes that we have recorded over the years that may have been lost in the library. So enjoy listening to some of the best from Psych Sessions.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond Teaching. I'm here with my colleagues. I am Eric Landrum.
I'm Asani Sewell.
I'm Yinka Kinchler-Smith.
And I'm Susan Nolan.
And today we decided we would talk about the topic that no one has any opinions about at all, letters of recommendation. And I say that with tongue in cheek because Susan just quieted us down and said, save all that for when we're recording, just save it. We're going to listen to our fearless leader and chat about that. And we're going to talk today from the perspective of faculty writing the letters. Is that correct?
Correct.
For students, as opposed to for our colleagues. Which
right.
We'll
And that could very well
date.
be another episode,
Definitely.
Writing letters for colleagues for promotion and tenure or for grants or things like that. So the tricks of the trade for writing letters for students who ask us for letters of recommendation.
Yinka just had some really great insights that I was encouraging her to keep. So I'd love for Yinka to kick us off.
First of all, to be honest, I don't write a letter for everyone. It's a kind of quality control thing for me. If I'm going to write a letter, I want it to be a strong letter. And I want it to be about a student that I really know their work and I have a good sense of them. So if I agree to do it, once I agree to do it, I ask the student for a few things. First of all, I warn them that I need advance. I need, if possible, give me 4 to 6 weeks. Don't just spring it on me and say, hey, can you write me a letter? I ask them to give me a copy of their most recent CV or resume, whichever one they have. I always ask for an unofficial transcript of their records. And I don't ask for an official one because I don't want them to have to pay for it. I just want to get a sense to see how they've done in classes besides mine. And if there have been ups and downs, we can talk about it and I can get a sense so I can incorporate that into the letter that I write. I also ask for a list of the places that the letter needs to go. Who am I addressing the letter to? What is the place that they're applying to? I ask for a copy of their personal statement, because there may be things about them that they include in there that I can draw from to help craft the letter that I'm going to do. And finally, I ask for a list of the deadlines and they need to give them to me again so that they're well in advance. So I'm not scrambling at the last minute because that's just going to make me aggravated. You may not like the end results. Make me happy so I can make you happy. That's what I always say to my students.
So, Yinka, I love your list. I'm going to modify yours.
Oh, please.
For what I do. I don't ask for transcripts because on my system, I can look those up if I needed to. I ask my students for a listing of classes that they took with me with semesters and grades, because that's going to save me because actually on our Boise State transcripts, they don't have the professor. So I wouldn't be able to detect that from transcripts. And plus, I teach some classes with large enrollment, so I wouldn't be able to remember. If they had research methods with me, I'd remember. But if they had introduction to the psych major, I wouldn't remember because it's a large enrollment class. So that's the one thing that I might add a little bit differently. And I'll let the others answer, but Yinka, I want to circle back at some point. And because you started off with, I don't write for everyone. And I'd like you to go into a little bit, and I will too. How do you decide when you say no to a student?
I do something closer to what you do, Eric. I have a recommendation form that students have to fill out.
Ooh.
Where they give a lot of that information. What context have I known you? And I have things you can click off and explain. Was I your academic advisor? Did you work in my lab? Which of the following classes, semester and grade? What are some things that you want me to highlight about you in this letter? I may not, but I want them to tell me what they perceive that I saw. I also ask for a CV or resume and any other personal statement kinds of things that they might have, much like you do, Yinka. But I asked for all of these things. And so if they just send me the thing that says, I was asked for a letter of recommendation from you, I'm not going to just fill it out because they need to be asking me.
I think I do much the same of what you all are describing. And Susan, I don't have a form per se, but I do have a standard email that I send out. And so I attack the student letter recommendation process by being highly organized. So I've got an email that I send out to students who request letters of recommendation that basically asks for all the things that you were naming, including the timeline for getting it completed. I do a bulleted list of things that they want me to say, and then I can use that bulleted list, pull it into my letter of recommendation. But I think it would be worth talking about how we keep this all organized, right? Because it can be a lot to maintain. And I can either now or later talk about some of my organizational strategies that help me keep track of all of this.
Talk about them now.
Yeah. Okay. Yinka, I'm so happy to. Thank you for asking. We use as a way of containing all of our files and things as our online storage management system. So there I've got lots of folders. So I've got a folder of emails where I can send the email out to students who are asking for letters with information that we were just talking about. But I also retain all the letters of recommendation and I organize them in a certain way. I organize them by saying, these are students I've only had in class. These are students who I have supervised their clinical work and have had in class. These are students who I've supervised clinical work, have had in class, and also research. I know this sounds ridiculous, but what that allows me to do is that when a student approaches me for a letter, okay, the student has been in my class, I've had them in research, then I have a little bit of an example of other letters that I've written for students of that type that I can just use as a little bit of a template. Now, of course, you individualize the letter for the particular student, but at least then you're not starting completely from scratch. You have a little bit of a template, or you can say, oh, wow, this student was very similar to that student that I had 3 years ago. We've all had that feeling. It feels like the same student keeps coming through again and again. We love them all, of course. And so that sort of allows for that too. So keeping highly organized is one way that I do it, is I just keep all of my letters organized in this way, and I can go back and have a little bit of a template.
I do the same thing that you do, Asani, so I don't think it's ridiculous at all.
Okay.
When I name the files, I put after the name and the semester, I put those contexts. So if they were in the laboratory research experience course with me, I put LRE. If they were in abnormal, I put ABN. And so then I can actually find the letter that has the exact same matchup and the parts I use, because I describe the courses. I want the reader to understand in this course, they would have done the following things. And then, of course, I can tailor how did the student do in that context for that student. But I do the same thing. And the other organizational piece is on my online to-do list. I put all the letters of recommendation with the first due date. And that way I don't forget to get it done. And then I also have 2 automatic Outlook files for emails. One is recommendations, one's completed recommendations. So once they're done, I move them from one file to the other. But I can still check and prove that I sent it in and that I got the confirmation if a student comes to me and says, whatever university didn't get it. So I think the more organizing you can do, the absolute better.
I agree with both of you. And I also do a variation of that using Dropbox is where I keep them. But I just want to go back to something that I think Asani, you said, I can't remember who said it, but it was about just getting, or maybe it was Susan, just getting a notification in your email that it has asked that you write a letter of recommendation. That kind of is presumptuous and I actually think rude. I've had it happen once and and it was a former student who did that. And I actually emailed her to say, I received this from such and such a place. I don't recall us ever having had this conversation. I got radio silence back. So I think the person was embarrassed and they should have been, because it's just a common courtesy to ask first before you submit someone's name, because it actually winds up looking badly for you, the applicant, if they don't respond. So, I mean, I'm just saying that to put it out there to potential students who may ask, always make sure you do us the courtesy and ask first to make sure that we're going to be willing and able, because we may not be able for whatever reason to do it at that point in time. So you want to make sure that the person is in agreement.
Well, Yinka, I think you were very courteous for that one time it happened to you, that you actually reached out to the student, because your response could have very well been, no, I'm not going to write for this student because I wasn't asked and I never consented.
I didn't.
But at least the student knew that.
Yes. Yes.
Because of your correspondence, as opposed to the student didn't give you the courtesy of asking. You went above and beyond and gave the student the courtesy of responding to an unsolicited ask.
this is tangentially related, but I also find, because my recommendation form that they fill out tells them that they must waive their right to see the letter. It also, by the way, says by sending me this form, you are giving me the right to look at your transcripts within the advising system. Because ethically, if I don't have to look at it for a certain course and they're not my current advisee, so that's something that's on it too. But if I go in and I find they have not waived their right, I will reach out back to them and explain to them why that's important for themselves. Because if I see, as someone coming to our program, if I see that someone has not waived the right, I take that letter with a grain of salt, because I know that professor who wrote it. So I do ask them, go in and change that. Politely, of course.
So I think one of the most difficult conversations I have with students, and these days under COVID, it's typically over email, is saying, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to write you a letter. And by the way, I do with what Yinka does as well. I always advise students when they ask a faculty member or anyone, honestly, for a letter, always ask, would you be willing to write me a strong letter of recommendation? That's one of the number one tips I give. And one of the most heartbreaking conversations that I have to have is when I say no to that. And as we all know on this podcast, and many of our listeners do, I believe a faculty member never wants to hurt a student's future. I just don't, maybe there's a couple of really oddball faculty members out there, but I don't think people who are going to listen to this, teachers of psychology, are in that ilk. So I would rather not write than write a weak letter, because a weak letter is going to, in my estimation, hurt a student's future. Having written, I don't know, a few thousand of these over 30 years, I kind of know what I'm going to write after I know the student or after I see all the credentials that she or he has sent to me. And that's a hard conversation to have. To be able to say, it's
almost always occurs on email, because that's the most common way for students to ask me. And I have a bunch of signatures in my Outlook that are for all the different situations that come up again and again, even if it's something that only comes up once a year and I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And one of them is saying no. And it only occurs maybe once or twice a year, but it has a template for what are the most common reasons. One is, you got a C in my class of over 100 students, and I didn't really get to know you. You never came to office hours. Explain, not the words I'm using now. I also offer for all of these students, if you would come to my office hours or set up a meeting, and I can help you brainstorm people that you might ask, who might be people who can say more about you than I can. And I also explain how a lukewarm letter is worse than. Yeah. But I have that template ready to go. So when it happens, I pull up the template, I adjust it for that student's situation, but it's not that often.
Yeah, I'm thinking I had a back and forth with a student where it was a very similar thing. Students who we want to write a strong letter for. You're present in class. You not only do well speaking to take up air, you're making good, solid points. You're engaged, blah, 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 blah. And I actually had a student who was barely present and wanted a letter. And I said all these points. And that I've since changed my approach, because that was a learning lesson for me. And no matter what I said, she still wanted the letter, because it turned out there was nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And it definitely was not a glowing letter. It was, this person was in my class, they took my class, they got this grade and blah blah, but it wasn't the glowing way that I would normally do it. And so that was when I learned the lesson that I had to be this is what I had expected. And you only took one class with me anyway. And this was how, so I readjusted, but it was very hard to sit and say to the student that, and then to know that they had nowhere else really to go. Yeah.
I've also said no to letters when I just don't have enough time to write them. And I think we've all had that, students who have come to ask for letters when it's due at the end of the week, when it's Wednesday or something like that. So I've certainly said no to those students who haven't given enough time, and to allow that to be a teachable moment for them too. Like, you've not given me enough time to write the letter. I tell students that the 4 to 6 week time frame that I think that we've all landed upon for being able to write a letter is not that it takes me 4 to 6 weeks to craft a letter, but rather because you get so many letter of recommendation requests, you've got to fit it into your schedule along with everything else that's going on. So finding the time and space where you can actually sit down and write, that's what takes the time there that I think that students don't realize. I have on just a few occasions written for students who have needed a letter in, the 11th hour. The students that I know very well and have said, Dr. Sewell, this opportunity has come my way and I didn't know about it. And I really want to apply for it. I'm a perfect fit. And you look the student, you see the opportunity and you're like, okay, I will make the time to do that. But that's a rare occasion, I would say. More often than not, if students are coming without a lot of time, you just have to say, I've had to say no. And that is hard to do.
Yeah, 4 to 6 weeks is generous for both of you. I actually asked for 2 months. I really do. I asked for 2 months notice. And Asani, you're exactly right in that not only does it take so many letters that we're crafting, but for me, I'll just be honest, I have to be in the right mood to write a letter. I can't just sit down and write a letter today after we're done recording this podcast. If I'm not in the right mood, I will not write a good letter. I won't craft a good letter. So I have to wait for that time frame. Not only do I have the right amount of time, but I'm in the right mood. And then a letter of recommendation for a student has to be perfect. So there can't be any grammatical errors. And then if I have to replicate that letter for 6 more graduate applications, I have to look up every single school and double check that the student gave me the correct information, make sure that I have, is it a master's or a doctoral? Even though I'm not mailing it to an address, but I'm submitting it to an online form, I'm actually going to put the mailing address in my letter to make it look like a letter. So I'm going to do all these details. That one letter recommendation I'm writing will actually take me probably 3 or 4 hours by the time it's all said and done. And by the way, when I say yes, I'm happy to do it. I am not complaining here. I am happy to do it, but I want all those things at my fingertips. And I've never done a form, but I love the idea of a form. Having all of that right there at the ready, all in one spot. I'm not as organized as any of you in terms of file naming and having the courses in the file name. That's really clever. But in my letters, I've written so many of them that they are templated in my head. So I have a standard opening paragraph. I have a standard second paragraph. If they've been a TA or an RA, I have a standard third and fourth paragraph. I have a standard closing paragraph. So, I don't copy and paste, but when you've written so many of them, it does become second nature.
To your point, Eric, about writing so many of them and them being second nature, I don't do this personally, but I do have colleagues of mine who will I teach graduate students only, doctoral students. They will have our students write the letters themselves and say, you write the letter that you would like me to write for you and turn it into me. And then I will craft my letter based on that. So that's an interesting strategy. It's not one that I've used before, but I do have a couple of colleagues that do that and see that as being a useful thing. So I don't know what that means in terms of their lead time, in terms of when that student has to get the letter to them to be able to craft their letter and all of that sort of stuff. But that is also a strategy.
So let me address, if you'll allow me, let me address that one, because I've heard that one and I've seen undergraduate instructor colleagues do that. So first off, I respect that other people do this other ways. So whatever works for them and gets it done. I actually find that borderline unethical. I really do. Because if I've worked with a TA or an RA or a student in my class, writing a letter and working with students should be a mutually beneficial relationship. So if a student's an RA with me, a research assistant, and they've devoted a year of their life to helping me advance my research, and I'm going to get a publication out of it, advance my career, and hopefully they're advancing their career with a co-authorship on a conference presentation, or maybe even a publication in some cases. Part of that mutual benefit is that they know they're going to get a letter from me, and hopefully a strong letter from me. At the very least, I ought to be able to craft an original letter in my own words. I understand your colleagues and my own colleagues in the past who want to get a draft of a letter from the student. I might forget some things. I might forget some stories. So I understand and respect the option. The one colleague I'm thinking of in the past, it was a very lazy thing that he did. And he didn't do it as a learning experience for the students. He did it because he was being lazy. And this is where I came to my somewhat unbalanced view that I think asking a student to write a draft of their own letter could be considered borderline unethical.
There's also a happy medium, I think, which is what
Sure
I do
there
on my
is.
form, where I
Well,
say,
that's what I was just going to say.
remind me of the things that you would like me to highlight in the letter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then I won't forget that story because they're
Right.
saying, hey, remember you told me I gave the best presentation in this class of anyone. And it's, nope, I didn't remember that. So thank you for telling me that, but you are right. And then I can put it in. So I think you can ask for those details from the students without having them write their own letters.
Right letter. Yep.
Yeah. Or maybe, and maybe I'm just having a visceral reaction to a memory that I've had in the past. But I guess if the faculty member ended up taking that draft or ended up taking those notes that came out of the form and just essentially adding sincerely R. Eric Landrum, I would find that borderline unethical.
Yeah, no, I like that idea that Susan has just spoken of about asking them to point out things that they may like you to include that you
Right.
may not have caught or remembered from your time together. You know,
And
that
sometimes
may-
I disagree. They'll write, I gave an excellent presentation. I'll be like, so much. So I don't highlight. But yeah, they're most of them are quite good about pointing out the highlights. I also wanted to add in terms of the time, one of the things that I find very frustrating are all the different, and I don't put the mailing address on it, Eric. That's an
sure.
added thing. I do
Old school.
put the degree because even if they're applying to all master's programs, the degree names might differ. So I do
Yes.
change that in the opening line. Which does take time. But I find it very aversive to fill out the forms for the different institutions that have, where does the
Ugh.
student fall percentage-wise among everyone you've ever taught?
that's
And they
Top
vary
2%.
by each. I know. And it's like each of them are different, or is the student outstanding, exceptional, very good? What's the difference? And then they'll ask additional things in addition to the letter. And I have to admit that I will say, see my letter for those because it takes just so long. I love when they're applying to law school because you just upload the one letter and that's it. So yeah, anyone who's applying to law school, thank you.
I also do this, see my letter.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
APA is working on, and that does offer a centralized application service, Site CAS. And some schools have opted into that where you apply to that one place and then they distribute it like the law school. It's being slowly adopted.
Our graduate program uses SiteCast,
Oh, good.
which is excellent. Of course, I sit on the side as a faculty member reviewing all these applications and letters written by faculty members. It's really slick, really nice to use. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure you can customize the particulars that you want for your program, like the prompts for the I'm blanking on it.
You
the
can,
prompts for
although
the-
at least for our
you can.
program, it still has the rating thing of like, where does the student rank amongst all students you ever taught before? So that's still there. I don't know if that's a SciCast thing or a Pacific University thing.
Yeah. What do you think are the top mistakes that students make? Or what should they avoid when asking for letters of recommendation? Are there any tips we can offer? What do we wish they would do differently?
Now, the tip that I have is one that actually comes at the end of the letter writing process. Once it's submitted, send a thank you. I don't know how many letters I've written, but I would say very few students actually come back and say, thank you, Dr. Sewell, for writing me a letter. But so memorable are those students who I've gotten cards sometimes, not very often, but sometimes students will send me a card. And that is just touches my heart that they really recognize the effort that has gone into writing these letters. I know that's the back end of the process, tips for students, but I would say send an email, send a card, verbal, say something, acknowledge that the letter was sent and say thank you to the people that write them.
And Asani, tell me when you get in where you're going.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to piggyback. We're rooting for you.
What can we maybe, before we end, go around and say the things that we look for when we are reviewing letters? Like, what would be the top things you would like faculty members to mention when you're reading their letters of recommendation on the other end? I look for specifics. I look for, what did they do in your class specifically? Did your class involve a paper? Did your class involve data analysis? What did they do specifically and how did they do at it? Don't just say they were great. I would say specifics would be what I look for.
Yeah. And is this actually a strong letter? Or is it a coded letter? Because I've definitely read letters of recommendation where I'm like, this isn't particularly strong. I think that the recommender is asking me to read between the lines here about this student. So I think really making sure that this is a strong letter and that you're using evidence and examples, kind of, Susan, as you were saying, to back up your positive opinion of the student. Otherwise, it comes across as being lukewarm, or that there's something that you're trying to tell the recommender about how the student actually is, which is not so positive.
Yeah, I agree 120, 200%. I want examples. What was it about this student that stood out to you? Where, when, how? The details.
I want examples and stories, but I'm really impressed by them when they come from outside of class. So how was the student active as a teaching assistant or a peer advisor or a psych-chi officer or a volunteer in the community or a volunteer as an extracurricular club manager or whatever it is? Because being great in the classroom, with all due respect, doesn't really set them apart from 10 to 20,000 other undergraduates. It's important, don't get me wrong, but there's hundreds of people who graduate with a 4.0 GPA every commencement at Boise State. Have the letter writer tell me about what you did outside of the classroom, in addition to, or maybe you worked 3 jobs, but you maintained that 3.9 GPA and you also found time to volunteer. Tell me those stories in that letter, and that's what I'm going to be impressed by.
So I just want to share, we just finished I'm part of our Masters of Mental Health Counseling program, and we just finished reviewing applications and sending out acceptances and talking among our colleagues. What I don't want as a recommendation, I don't want a letter of recommendation from someone you babysat for. I don't want a letter of recommendation from your personal trainer at your gym. This is not, and I kid you not. And I don't know if it's like people don't know or they haven't thought, but those are not going to make you stand out. Those are not going to speak to your strengths in academia or your strengths as a potential counselor. So just think about who you're asking to write a letter of recommendation for you. And if you're not sure, reach out and ask people, ask faculty, who would be best to do this for me? Who would you talk to us? Yeah.
And that's actually great advice for all of us who are faculty members, that we probably should be talking about this more than we do in a psych club meeting or in our classes. If you're thinking about asking people for letters of recommendation down the road, this is another thing. We're doing this podcast Beyond Teaching to talk about the things that we don't often hear about as academics, but our students are in the same boat. There are a lot of things they might not even know. I'm sure the person who asked their babysitter and their personal trainer had no idea that this wasn't a good option.
Or your best friend. What does your best friend know about this?
And this is on us as faculty members for, if we're not conveying this is something, it's a really wonderful point, Yinka.
The phrase that I use with students all the time is, when you ask someone for a letter, they should be able to speak to your professional skills and abilities. I say that phrase over and over to my students. So your babysitter, the person who hired you to babysit, really can't speak to your professional skills and abilities. Your personal trainer, your pastor, your neighbor cannot speak to your professional skills and abilities.
So I would say letter writers, no more than 2 pages. I don't know if anyone writes more than 2 pages for a letter. After about a page and a half or so, especially when you're reading so many of those, the eyes start to gloss over. And so not more than 2 pages. And I think, Eric, to your point, I think we want to know what it's like to work with that student. So describing some of those qualities of the individual that makes me say, yeah, I want to spend the next 4 or 5 years with this person in a doctoral program, but training with them, or undergrad too. So thinking about that too.
In addition to the 2 pages, subheaders and bold. Show me where to look. Walk me through it. I love when I get a letter that has subheaders and bold of the most important points.
By the way, the 2 best letters I ever wrote in my career are both 4 pages, single spaced. So if I have stories that they were the best students I ever worked with, and if I have stories to tell, I'm telling them, and they both ended up doing really well, but it's because of them, not because of me.
That's great.
All right. Anything else that we want to add? about letters of recommendation.
I think that's it for
I think
today.
we covered it.
For now.
All right. Thanks for joining us. I hope we came up with some tips for our listeners.